All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? We have a packed agenda for the next hour, and I'll tell you all about that in just a second. I'm going to welcome those of you who just joined, and then we'll get started. My name is Seth Brenzel. I'm one of the board members at the San Francisco Parent Coalition, formerly Decreasing the Distance, and we're really happy that you've decided to spend a little bit of time this evening with our group and on the topic of the San Francisco Unified School District budget, which is on a lot of people's minds at the moment. A reminder that the meeting is being recorded. You're welcome to turn your video off if you'd like to not be in the final recorded video. Chat is currently disabled, so you're not able to chat with us during the meeting. We've collected a lot of questions that folks put in when they were RSVPing and from our members. And so we have some questions to ask our guest. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and I'm just going to mention the first 30 minutes we're going to spend with Rachel Norton, who is a former board commissioner for the San Francisco Unified School District. Welcome, Rachel. So glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
And then the second half of the meeting, starting at about 7:30, we'll turn it over to Meredith Dodson, founder and board member at San Francisco Parent Coalition, for some member updates, conversations about what our group is up to, and we'll be a little bit more interactive at that point. We're also joined tonight by board member Cliff Yee, who is also one of the founders of our group, and he's in the background helping with some of our tech for tonight's meeting. So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and just say 2 words about myself. I'm a parent here in San Francisco, been involved with Decreasing the Distance since about August or September last year, and now San Francisco Parent Coalition. I'm a nonprofit executive director and educator here, and really excited to welcome our guest, Rachel Norton. Rachel, if you can believe it, served 4 4-year terms.
Please, not 4.
Well, from what I could understand, it looked like 3 terms, right? 3
Yes,
4-year terms. So 12 years on our Board of Education. And Rachel is the executive director of the California State Parks Foundation. She's also worked for the San Francisco Parks Alliance, and has a long, work history in advocacy and public service. And so Rachel termed off the board, I think, in December, if I'm not
Actually, there's no term limits on the board.
Oh, not term limit.
So
Excuse
I
me.
just decided not to run.
Rachel did not run for re-election, and so left the board in December, and has a lot of wisdom, I think, for us to ask some questions of. So let's dive right into the question that's on a lot of people's minds. We are, as a district, facing what is being termed $100 million or so structural deficit, ongoing multiple year-over-year deficit. And recently, last month, we're notified by the California Department of Education that we need to make some changes in our budgeting for next year, maybe even this year, to avoid some state intervention. And so the nice way of saying that is, they're here to help. And so we have some state administrators and FIPP, and maybe you'll say what that is in a bit, helping our district out. How did we get here, Rachel?
How did we get here? Well, I want to start actually by just saying hi to a number of familiar faces in the people who are here, friends of mine. So nice to see you all and happy to be here. I still care really deeply about the San Francisco Unified School District, and so it gives me no pleasure to see us in this place where we are at this moment. And I would say, it took a long time to get here, and at least some of the big ticket items that were voted on that cost money, that have contributed to this deficit, I certainly was part of voting for. Did vote for some of those things when I was on the board, and I think it's important to acknowledge that and be transparent about that. I think Probably the biggest reason why we're here is our decision back in 2018 to continue to pay the Prop G raises that were passed, even though that proposition was challenged in court and causing the city to hold all of the property tax, the parcel tax receipts in an escrow account where they are to this day. And, at that time, it really did not seem like there was any other choice. We were in a place in San Francisco, where all we were talking about was affordability and the difficulty that teachers and school staff in particular were having affording living in San Francisco. And, we were starting school every year with empty classrooms. And it just, at the time, felt like a moral imperative to provide those raises. We knew that we were going to, be shortly in negotiations within a year or two. And we also fairly quickly started discussions with the city, with the mayor, about a replacement for Prop G that allowed us, which in fact did pass and allowed us. So there's basically, I think it's 2 years of increased salary and raises that were guaranteed under Prop G that the district paid for, even though we did not receive that money actually in parcel taxes. And I think, that's probably the biggest piece of deficit spending that we knowingly voted on at that time. I can recall in 2019, in the summer of 2019, I was on the budget committee, and Allison Collins was chairing it. It was Commissioner Maliga and I were members of the committee, and Commissioner Collins was the chair. And we received a presentation from Megan Wallace, the then new CFO of the district, who said, I'm getting my arms around the numbers and the district finances, and I need to tell you there's a really serious structural deficit. And, I think what I will say is, I don't think we were not aware of it at that time, but I do think we were not completely aware of how bad it was. It sort of took a new pair of eyes, and Megan Wallace coming to the board and saying, you're going to need to pay attention to this. And I remember it very clearly saying to the other two commissioners on the budget committee, this is really serious. I have never seen projections in 12 years of being on the board. I have never seen projections that are this dire. And we need to take it seriously as the budget committee. We need to report back to the board about it. And we need to stop spending. We need to recommend to the board that we stop passing new initiatives and coming up with new initiatives, because we've got to deal with this. And one of the principles in public budgets, not to go on and on and on, but just to say that, one of the things that became very clear to me in my years on the board is that as soon as you see that you have a budget problem, the quicker you can deal with it, the easier it is to deal with that problem. It is never easy. These are really, really difficult choices, and in an environment that we are underfunded in California in education. But because of those 3-year projections, which is what the state uses to determine if you're fiscally solvent, you've got to act in year 1 so that you can rein the problem in for years 2 and 3. And that's just a really important principle that unfortunately I think kind of got lost here.
Yeah. I don't think we mind you going on and on, because I think that's why everybody's here. So we're interested in your take, and so don't hesitate to explain.
Well, interrupt me if I start to.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very helpful insight. One thing I want to note is you joined the Board of Education, I think back in 2008, right? And I suspect in those first couple of years, you also faced pretty significant fiscal issues.
We did. And actually, I have to say, and I just went back and looked, because in 2010, we faced $113 million deficit for the upcoming year. And Carlos Garcia was the superintendent there. I had been on the board all of 18 months. And the difference with how that deficit was resolved versus how we're looking at this now is really, really striking. I mean, the way we found out about the deficit is that, in January, when they did, started planning the budget for the coming fiscal year, the superintendent and staff came right to the board and said, we've got this big deficit and we're going to give you a budget balancing plan um, that we're going to have to put into place as part of our budgeting process over the next few months. And it was painful. It was very painful. We had furlough days, we had a lot of things that nobody wanted and were not good for students. But the difference there was that the superintendent was very clear about the issue, and the board worked together very closely with the superintendent to resolve that. And 2 years later, we were back in a much, much more positive situation because of taking that action when we did, as
Right.
quickly as we did.
Um, yeah, I can imagine that the cuts, I mean, ultimately those are, it's going to affect people, and they affected, I'm sure, staff and programs, but ultimately students, a number
Right.
of
I mean,
people.
pretty much all the district spends money on. I mean, it spends money on a lot of things, but the vast majority of the spending is people, right? We pay people to do things, and
Mhm.
that's where the money goes. And so it's never, you are definitely having an effect on people when you make budget cuts. There's no two ways around it, both on the student side and on the worker side.
Right. Maybe we can just shift gears a little bit to this, and you may not know the ins and outs of this because this has happened just in the last month or so, but we've been notified that the state is taking a look at our budgets, wants a balancing plan by December, has FICMAT,
Mhm.
FCMAT
Right.
folks involved, made a presentation to the Board of Ed a couple of weeks ago, and can you say a little bit about what faces the district should we not get those sort of budget house in order, and what it might look like, again, for students, and what it might look like for the district? Yeah.
hmm Well, there are varying levels, right, of things that happen as a district slides deeper and deeper into fiscal distress.
Mhm.
And so right now, the FICMAT team, and I used to know what it stands for, and I was just thinking I was going to define it, and I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's obviously fiscal is one
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
F. It's the fiscal something team, but it
Yeah.
is, it is a state, essentially a state agency of experts that will come in and advise and work collaboratively with the board and superintendent, if they will work collaboratively with FICMAT to kind of help get things in hand. And I thought, actually, I did watch the meeting the other night where the two folks from FICMAT were talking to the board and the board was asking questions. I thought it was a good discussion. I thought I was pretty heartened by what the lead FICMAT guy said, that this is absolutely a solvable problem, and that San Francisco Unified is not the only district in this situation. I mean, I think he struck a good tone, of let's roll up our sleeves and we can solve this problem. It's not going to be easy, but we are here to help you. And I think that was the right tone. So they will come in and they will look at all different aspects of the budget and make suggestions of, we see you're a little bit, on the high side on this component of how you're spending benefits, or how you're managing, these contracts, or, they'll pick things out for the superintendent and staff and for the board to look at, of things they might adjust.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, that plan, there's not a lot of time to get that plan together for December. That's a really important date. If the state superintendent and the California Department of Education think that the board or superintendent has not made enough progress, or they don't think the plan is a viable plan, they have options available to them before you actually get to state takeover. I mean, they can ratchet up. So for example, they can hold the superintendent and board salaries, so they don't get paid until they, come up with a better plan. They can put a trustee in place who has oversight over the board's decision. The board still retains governance over the district, but that special trustee can set aside board decisions if they decide that the board has not been responsible, or that the decisions are not fiscally responsible. And then the most intense level of intervention is if the CDE decides that the district is going to be unable to meet its immediate obligations, either in the current year or the next fiscal year. They can offer an emergency loan to the district to keep it solvent, but that loan comes with the very, very important string that the special trustee, the superintendent is gone, the special trustee sits then in charge of the district, and the board's power is set aside. And so that special trustee reports to, the CDE. They don't report to the local community. They do not have to ask anybody in San Francisco's permission to make any decision that they think is the right decision. And it's very important to know that actually, I mean, of course, students are paramount, but really the trustee's job is to bring the district back to fiscal solvency. It is not to create a great learning environment for students. That's a secondary consideration. So, if all you care about is balancing the budget, you're going to make different decisions than if you're trying to factor in, the welfare of students or what community or parent preference is. So it's a pretty serious and dire situation.
Right. I hope that is you've just painted a picture of something we don't ever see in San Francisco. I hope we're working on a plan that will move us forward and avoid that. Speaking of which, what because that doesn't sound good, having a trustee that reports into Sacramento or into the state leaders, who's really only interested in budget solvency and is not paying attention necessarily to educational outcomes.
They can raise class sizes. They
Right.
can, they can set aside labor contracts. They can, they can do a lot of things. And, we're very used to, in San Francisco, we have a very, I would say energetic political culture. And so we are used to being able to go to a board meeting and have our voices, raising our voices and telling people what we think, what the board and the staff, what we think. And all of that really becomes besides the point for a special trustee.
Right. So what could the board and/or central office district be doing to right the ship in the short run? What are we looking for in terms of the levers that could be pulled to make our sort of put our budget house in order? What are you looking for? Or what might you be imagining the district working on in the next couple of months to get that plan together?
I think they're going to have to acknowledge that there are no good decisions here. There are no decisions that when faced with, that the commissioners or members of the public will say, oh yeah, that's good, we can cut that. No problem. All of that is gone. That has gone by the wayside years ago. So all of the decisions that are going to need to be made are going to be painful. And the question is, what is the least amount of pain for the most amount of impact on the 3-year projections? There's some arguments that, for example, like maybe you weigh layoffs over furloughs, right? Nobody wants layoffs, nobody wants furloughs. which is less disruptive ultimately to a child's education, to our need to retain experienced staff. And given the fact that you cannot be surgical about who you lay off, you can't, the law is pretty clear. We tried 1 year, years ago, to be more surgical around like walling off schools that had high percentages of particularly underserved students. And we were sued by the union, and the judge found against us, and so people were reinstated. So you can't say, well, we're only going to lay off teachers in X schools versus Y schools. You have to lay off staff purely based on seniority. So that means that well-loved, high-performing, great staff would lose their jobs. On the other hand, okay, there's furloughs, so maybe furloughs are fairer, but that hits everybody across the system. So these are the kinds of decisions. I mean, not to say it's going to be layoffs or furloughs. That's just an illustration of perhaps one decision that the board might consider. And so they're going to have to. I mean, what I'm going to be looking for is for them to respect the superintendent's expertise and the staff expertise. And it gives me no joy to say that I've just seen too many times members of this board speak and act as if they have a better insight into, how money should be spent, or, what is best as far as the budget of the district than the staff and the superintendent, the people who are paid every day to do this work. And so I would be looking for a more collaborative discussion and less, no, we don't like your ideas, we want you to only take our ideas. And I'm sad to say that I have not seen a lot of that yet.
Right. In this process of decision making, I think we have a lot of families on this call. This is mostly a parent coalition, caregivers, family members, and we're all thinking about kids and education because that's the central conversation here about education. Can you think, are there, that's going to be important to kind of keep as the center of these decisions? Like, how do we make choices that are the least bad for children and for groups of children and children across all of the various grades and ages? Do you have any advice on how to do that part? Because I think that's on all of our parents' minds.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a hard thing to contemplate as a parent, right? Because, and I want to say, I mean, every parent across the district, particularly those who have kids, in middle school and younger, like I know it's been really hard. The last year and a half have been really hard. And so no one is in a situation where, I mean, I think, any parent would be forgiven for feeling like, hey, I've given a lot. My kid has given a lot. My kid has suffered a lot, right? And so I want to acknowledge that. And then I also want to say, there are kids in homes where, yeah, it's been really hard and parents couldn't go to work, but where there still are books, where there's a good 3 meals a day being served, they have a bedroom to sleep in, where their lives are stable and safe and and managed by their parents. And then there are other families that because of their situation don't have those advantages, and those kids are going to suffer so much more by an increased class size, by the loss of paras, by the loss of school days that might happen with, if there are furlough days. All of the kinds of cuts tend to hit the kids with the least, the hardest. And I think that's just something that as parents, we have to keep in mind. It is going to be painful. There are going to be things that get cut from your school site that your kid really needs, or that your PTA fought for, or that, whatever it is. And I guess I would just say, I would say that these California has a boom and bust economy. So I've been through 2 or 3 of these cycles. This one is bad. It's bad. But it ebbs and it flows. So there will be, a year, 2 years, if we do the right things, if we pull together, and if we make the hard decisions now. In 2 years, things will look a lot better, and we can start to rebuild.
Yeah.
And so I guess I would just say, ask parents to keep sight of that, and to really try to think through, what are the cuts that I can bear, so that another kid that has a lot less, or that has, a more challenging home life, so that they don't have to suffer perhaps lifelong effects
Right.
from those things.
I know we're coming up to the end of our time in about 5 minutes, and I have 2 questions that I want to ask. So let me ask them both, and then you can choose which or both of them. If you know which, one really picks up on the last point, which is about parents and families and what maybe we can do. Like what can community members do? What can family members? What can parents do in this time to sort of help?
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
think there's I think everybody on this call is probably here because they want to learn and they want to help. So that's
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
The second thing is, I think, you mentioned the Prop G funds that are kind of sitting out there, and it made me think, oh, that there's these funds that could just come out of, all of a sudden they could be released, or
Mhm.
there could be some sudden revenue stream that could come from some other place. How much faith or hope or trust should we put into that kind of stream of thinking? And then again, what can parents and families be doing to help?
Mhm. Well, I mean, that Prop G, the money that's in that escrow account certainly would help. It's one-time money. So that this is the thing, like, as we're I mean, it's not, yes, stopping the bleeding and resolving the deficit, and sort of like getting away from this kind of serious ratcheting up of sanctions from the state is a good thing. And so we should, if we can find sources of one-time money, we should absolutely use them. But at the same time, we should not lose sight of the fact that there is a structural deficit. So we have got to figure out how to get the district on a firmer footing going forward, so we don't find ourselves in the same place in a year or two when those one-time funds dry up. The other thing, and you said this, and I meant to add it on, and I forgot, so I'm glad you reiterated the question. I mean, the single biggest thing that a group like San Francisco parents can do, that a parent group can do, pay attention, and really learn about how the decisions that are being made, take turns and attend the budget committee and write up notes for each other and pour over those reports, like share knowledge, because there's a lot of power in that knowledge. So that, if the board does not work collaboratively with the superintendent, if there is not a good faith commitment to really trying to solve this problem, that there will be expertise and knowledge in the parent community that can say, oh, no, this is not, this is not how we're going to do this. And here's why. And there's a lot of power in that. And I think that you've seen in the last year how parents are, the expertise of parents, and parents standing up and saying, we want something different for our kids, has made a lot of change already, and created a lot of, gotten a lot of attention. So I think there's a lot of power in that.
Great. Well, I thank you for that encouragement, because I think we all need a little bit of encouragement given the news, and I think knowing that parents can make a difference in that way, collectively and individually, is great. Just for those of you who didn't hear this at the beginning, we were going to spend the first 30 minutes with Rachel Norton, who has been talking with us, and we're so grateful for her. And I'm going to give her a moment to say the last word in a second. And then we are going to pivot to a more generalized meeting of the San Francisco Parent Coalition with some updates led by Meredith Dodson. All the questions that I've been asking are summarized versions of the questions that nearly 75 or 100 people have written into. So I hope we got to a lot of things. If we didn't get to your question, I dare say that if you want to write into SFParents and you have a particular question for Rachel, we'll try to figure out how to get to her and get you
I'm
an
on
answer.
Twitter at
And she's
RP
there. You
Norton.
go. You can
So
find her. She's open and
you can tweet
available.
at me.
Very lovely.
I
So
won't answer you if you're mean, but
yeah,
but
don't be yeah be kind. But Rachel's available. To that point, I just want to thank you. Thanks. I didn't say this at the beginning, but Rachel had two kids go through San Francisco Unified in various schools and graduated from, I think, Washington.
both kids, yeah.
Both kids, and um, anyhow, and has been a commissioner on our board for 12 years and left the board in December. But it's been so gracious, and it's wonderful to hear from you. Do you have any final thoughts or words for our assembled group here tonight?
I think just, to reiterate that there is a lot of power in paying attention. And so I want people to know that, and also know that this is a cycle. So, we will be in a better place at some point in the future. Yes, it's going to be hard. And yes, there's going to be some pretty awful choices that they're going to have to make, but they won't be forever. And I believe very, very strongly in public education generally, and in San Francisco, we absolutely can have a world-class public education system. Our children deserve it. This community votes always for parcel taxes and school bonds and all the things for schools. People in San Francisco care deeply about their public schools, and we should all take heart in that, and continue to work to support our public schools and make them better. So.
Wonderful. That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Rachel.
All
We
right.
really appreciate your time.
Bye, everybody.
We'll,
Thank you.
we'll see you later. Take
Thanks
care.
for having me.